A young woman headed to a bus stop and vanished. 2 days later, she was found several kilometers away. The police began an investigation, but they couldn't find a single lead or clue. For 38 years, the case remained unsolved. It wasn't until 2022 that innovative forensic technologies finally helped uncover the dark truth. In this video, we'll tell you what happened to Mary Jane Thompson and how science is changing the approach to solving cases like this. Mary Jane Thompson was born on October 5, 1962, in Houston, Texas. She grew up in a close and loving family and had many friends. Even in her school years, she decided she wanted to become a model. After graduation, she moved to Los Angeles, where she lived for a while, chasing her dream. After that, she decided to move to Dallas to take acting classes. At the time, she was 21 years old. She had to take on 2 jobs to pay for her rent and classes. Mary worked as a waitress and a florist, dedicating all her remaining time to her dream of becoming a model. She lived this busy life for about 6 months. On February 11, 1984, Mary called her mother and said she was going to a clinic for a minor health concern. The young woman headed there in the evening. She had to take a bus from her apartment to the clinic. When she arrived, the clinic was already closed, and she had to wait for another bus to go back home. But after that moment, no one ever saw Mary again. The young woman didn't contact her relatives, but they weren't immediately alarmed. Mary was juggling 2 jobs and acting classes, so she often simply didn't have the time to call her parents. 2 days later, the Dallas Police Department received a call. Someone had been found near abandoned railroad tracks behind some warehouses. Detectives arrived at the scene and saw a young woman with signs of strangulation. They found her documents, which allowed for a quick identification. It was Mary Jane Thompson. Medical examiners studied the remains and concluded that she had passed away several days earlier. In those years, the area was mostly occupied by warehouses, many of which were empty. That's why Mary was only discovered 2 days later. Experts also determined that the cause of her passing was strangulation, and the unknown perpetrator had used her own leg warmers. Mary had also been brutally assaulted, which allowed criminalists to collect the attacker's biological material. However, back in 1984, this evidence was completely useless. They couldn't even extract a DNA sample from it, let alone identify the person. But even then, police policy was to store such samples in laboratory conditions, as law enforcement leadership hoped that with technological advancements, they would one day be able to solve these cases. After examining the crime scene, investigators found no other clues. The warehouse where Mary was found was located about 5 kilometers from the clinic, in a remote industrial area. By talking to her friends and family, they were able to piece together a more precise timeline of events. After seeing the clinic was closed, Mary would have had to walk a short distance to the bus stop to go home. It's believed the perpetrator attacked her there, then put her in a car and drove to the location where she was found. With no other leads, investigators began looking at men with prior convictions who lived and worked in the area. But this line of inquiry yielded no results. The police were certain the assailant knew the area well. Not only did he manage to abduct a young woman from a place where it went completely unnoticed, but he also took her to abandoned railroad tracks, hidden from public view by warehouses. Investigators had no witnesses who might have caught even a glimpse of Mary Jane that evening. There were no surveillance cameras in those days, except on the city's main streets. As a result, the case quickly hit a dead end. It was handed over to the ColdCase unit, which was tasked with periodically reviewing such investigations. This didn't happen until 25 years later, in 2009. The Dallas Police Department decided to reinvestigate the incident using new technologies. Experts were able to extract a DNA sample from the biological material found with Mary Jane, but their luck ended there. The sample was run through all available databases, but the owner wasn't found. This could mean he had never been held accountable for a serious crime, or that his offenses occurred in an era when DNA samples weren't collected from such offenders. Consequently, detectives could only do one thing: periodically run the sample through the databases, hoping its owner would be caught for another offense. This happens quite often, allowing investigators to solve even the most hopeless cases. The case was reopened again 9 years later, in 2018. A detective sought help from an independent organization focused on solving violent crimes and developing tools and measures to reduce their number. Together, they tried to secure more resources for Mary Jane's case to conduct the latest DNA research. It took another 2 years, until 2020, for the FBI to join the investigation. By that time, the Bureau had collected a huge number of old, unsolved cases where investigators had a perpetrator's DNA sample, but had never been able to identify a suspect. With advancements in technology, all these cases had a significant chance of being solved thanks to genetic genealogy. This technology, which appeared relatively recently, became a true breakthrough in forensics. It works roughly like this. Specialists analyze the DNA sample of an unknown person using state-of-the-art equipment. Based on the data, they create a profile that can be used to find relatives. A family member's DNA can end up in a database in several ways. First, they could be offenders themselves and be in the FBI's database. Second, people can voluntarily submit their DNA to public databases designed for finding relatives or tracing their ancestry. Such services have become especially popular in recent years, which has been a great help to detectives. In Mary Jane's case, the search took 2 years. First, experts found distant relatives through the DNA sample. Then came the hardest part. They had to study the biographies of several thousand people, eliminate all who didn't fit, and select the one who was most likely the perpetrator. This process of elimination is based on factors like age, place of residence at the time of the incident, and so on. The situation is complicated by the fact that DNA databases only point experts to a certain group of relatives, but their specific DNA samples aren't available for comparison. There's only one way forward: select the most likely candidate and obtain their DNA. In 2022, detectives received a name from the experts, a person who could be connected to Mary Jane's passing. They studied his biography and decided to follow him. Waiting for the right moment, the police obtained an item from which they could collect a DNA sample. The lab conducted the necessary analysis and concluded that his DNA was a perfect match to the sample from the crime scene. The man was 60-year-old Edward Morgan of Dallas. As police had suspected, he lived near the crime scene, just 1 kilometer away. At the time, he was only 22 years old. In February, Morgan was arrested and charged with the serious crime. He is currently in custody, awaiting trial. Bail has been set at $500,000. The police have not yet released any details about his life. Those will only become known during the trial. But one thing can be said with absolute certainty. The biological material found at the scene is a perfect match to his DNA. During a press conference, investigators expressed confidence that Morgan will be found guilty and will face punishment for his actions. In the state of Texas, he faces the highest penalty. Unfortunately, Mary Jane's parents did not live to see this day. Her father, who fought for justice for his daughter until the very end, passed away in 2020, and her mother, even earlier. Her only remaining close relative is her sister, who was shocked to receive a call from the police after 38 years. The detective informed her that they finally knew the name of the suspect, and he was under arrest. On her social media, the sister constantly wrote about Mary Jane, wishing her a happy birthday and saying she would never stop hoping for the case to be solved. Upon learning of Edward Morgan's arrest, she wished for him to spend the rest of his life behind bars. She also promised to attend every single court hearing until a final resolution is reached in the case. Thus, genetic genealogy is opening up unprecedented possibilities for detectives. Before this field was invented, police had to search for criminals using clues or witnesses. Having a DNA sample never guaranteed that the perpetrator would be found. But now, with the smallest sample, experts can find even the most distant relatives and ultimately identify the person responsible. The only thing preventing all such cases from being solved is the limited scope of DNA databases. Although experts can identify several thousand relatives from one person's data, it's still not enough. However, science is constantly advancing, and in the foreseeable future, we may see technologies that can easily identify any person from a single DNA sample. Even now, experts can create a rough sketch of a DNA holder's appearance, and this field is only in its early stages of development. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments, and don't forget to leave a like to help this video reach more people. Thank you for watching.